Hi, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. The last couple of years have seen major changes in immigration policy, as you all know, which have contributed, of course, to the conversation that we're going to have today. I'm not going to speak to the totality of changes in the immigration space, but really want to just lay out a couple of key trends that CLASP has really been following closely. So the first is increased immigration enforcement and family separation. At the border, of course, we've seen horrendous attempts to use family separation and detention to deter migration and to really make it harder for individuals to seek asylum here in the United States. But what I want to also highlight is that in the interior as well, we have seen increased immigration enforcement actions and really overall changes that make every undocumented immigrant in the United States a priority for deportation. With heightened arrests in communities, more individuals, including children, are vulnerable to witnessing these enforcement actions. The second trend I want to highlight are attempts to remove protections for individuals, such as those with DACA status or TPS. So DACA is the protection for those individuals who came to this country as very young children, and TPS is a temporary protective status meant to give humanitarian relief to immigrants from particular countries. Now, as the Trump administration has attempted to remove those protections, litigation has prevented that from being successful, but this is an area of increased stress and instability for families. And I would just say to keep in mind that in many cases, individuals with these protections are generally long-term residents of the United States. Over 500,000 children have parents with DACA or TPS status. So this has been a dramatic change to be introducing instability to these communities. The third area I would highlight is reduced access to health, nutrition, and public benefit programs due to a range of harmful policies and regulations, probably the most important here being the very deeply harmful public charge rule. This was the rule that essentially makes it harder for low-income immigrants to obtain long-term status in the United States if they've used a nutrition program like SNAP assistance or Medicaid. It's important to note that in public charge, as well as many other policies that have been put forward over the last couple of years, the actual number of immigrants impacted by a particular policy change can be relatively small, but what we're seeing are large-scale chilling effects. So we have studies showing that immigrants have been disenrolling from the public programs that they or even their citizen children are eligible for due to that fear of immigration consequences. Taken together, all of these actions have just contributed to an overall climate of fear and trauma impacting immigrants, including those with legal status. And that's important to keep in mind here as well. At the Center for Law and Social Policy, we have worked to document the harm to immigrant children and families. Beginning in 2017, we released a series of reports that looked at the experiences of young children in immigrant families in 6 states. And most recently in July, published a report on a study of large-scale worksite raids that had occurred in 3 different states. We talked with immigrant parents, with service providers across lots of different areas, and in all of our research projects found very common themes. The first, family separation, but also widespread fear of family separation. We found children as young as 3 years old worrying about losing a parent to deportation. We found their distress evident in behaviors such as withdrawal, increased aggression, developmental regression. And I want to be clear that it is not just children with undocumented parents who have experienced this constant worry. We actually heard stories of children with parents who had legal residency and even citizen parents who had these same fears because children are hearing what's happening in their environment around them and don't necessarily know the particulars of the status of their parents. We also found withdrawal from the community, so families limiting time in parks, libraries, using community resources. And losing access to vital health and nutrition services. I mentioned the decline in accessing public programs, but also not frequenting clinics, delaying or foregoing important child well visits, prenatal care, those kinds of things as well. We also heard about changes in employment and loss of income. This was true prior to the pandemic. I'll talk about the impact of the pandemic in a moment. Mostly this was around families with undocumented members where there was greater exploitation. But of course, families impacted by deportation as well had to deal with the sudden loss of income if a parent was detained or deported. And finally, I think that we're going to talk about this as well. Tremendous stress on children, on parents, but also on providers and community leaders. When we talked with service providers, they found that immigrant families were asking for new and different resources and information that they couldn't always provide them. They looked to childcare providers to get information on immigration policy changes, and that could be very stressful for providers. I would say in the case of our worksite raids work in particular, community leaders just stepping up to provide basic resources to families who were impacted by the raids, and really in those cases overwhelmed by the stress on themselves as well. So that's another part of the story here. It's important to understand that these were the conditions that already existed when COVID-19 arrived. And it is absolutely the case that these inequities and challenges for immigrant families have been worsened pretty significantly. Communities of color, including immigrants of color, have experienced the worst impacts of the virus in terms of illness and death due to health inequities that predated the pandemic. And the economic fallout for immigrant families has been particularly severe. Immigrant workers, it's important to understand, are overrepresented in essential industries, in healthcare, in agriculture. These are the workers caring for patients and growing our food during a public health emergency. They've also been overrepresented in some of the industries that have been hardest hit by the pandemic in terms of unemployment. And yet, despite all of this, many immigrants have been all but completely left out of the federal policy response on COVID. In particular, I want to highlight that working immigrant families, these are households that included 3.5 million children, were excluded from economic stimulus payments simply because they had a worker who filed taxes with an individual tax ID number, an ITIN number, rather than a Social Security number. And we know that employment, housing, healthcare are tremendous needs of immigrant families right now. And unfortunately, at least one report, the Urban Institute found, excuse me, that immigrants and households with low incomes were actually avoiding even the COVID-19 relief programs that they were eligible for out of fear of immigration consequences. This is a time where we are seeing food insecurity in households, and in particularly among households with children, skyrocketing. And there's grave concern that immigrant families are in fact not accessing the nutrition services that are available. So where do we go from here? I think it is clear. Some things remain unclear as we enter thinking about the next, the federal transition, and thinking about, we certainly know we have a new president-elect and vice president-elect. We don't yet know what the balance of power will look like in Congress, but several things are very clear. The first is that another COVID relief package is absolutely urgent and essential. And it's critically important that it addresses the enormous needs of families across the country. And it has to be inclusive of immigrant families, including on nutrition, on housing, on economic stimulus payments. There are bipartisan proposals in the House and Senate to include those ITIN holders in economic stimulus payments, should there be another round of cash assistance. And that would be really important. I would say for those of you working directly with families and in communities, this is a really important time to tell the stories of the needs that you're seeing to your members of Congress, so that we make sure that we are passing COVID relief that gets to all families. We anticipate that a Biden administration will fully restore the DACA program and continue protections for TPS recipients. Groups are also asking the administration to really take a comprehensive look at immigration enforcement reform. The president-elect has promised to end large-scale worksite raids. We are urging the administration to focus on family unity in their immigration policies. And of course, there's lots of areas to think about. There's been attention on the idea of reuniting children who have been separated from their parents. We need to look comprehensively across those policies within the interior of the country as well to really prioritize children and their parents. Another key early action will be enforcing the sensitive locations policy to make sure that families can get the childcare, the healthcare, all of the services that they need. And there's much to do to restore trust in government. The administration will have a very large agenda here, and we hope that efforts to do so will include use of the bully pulpit, but also working in partnership with community members as well. And finally, a huge need to increase access to health, nutrition, education, and other programs. That can be done through rolling back the harmful public charge rule, but we really need to look across all strategies, outreach, education, increasing the availability of assistance for families to make sure that everyone can get what they need. And I think we'll hear more about the particular practical ideas that need to be put in place, but for sure, looking across our education, our human needs, our social service programs, and really ensuring that we have trauma-informed services available to families and can start to undo the harm that is so necessary. As I close out, I want to just mention a new network that CLASP and partners have formed called the Children Thrive Action Network. This is a network whose mission is to defend and support children in the United States in mixed status immigrant families. We have national, state, and local partners, and I encourage you to go to the website and sign up to be a part of this community and really be able to share in some of the advocacy work ahead to really prioritize and center the well-being of children in immigrant families. So thank you so much for having me, and I'll look forward to the presentations and the conversation.
Thank you, Hannah. And Hannah will be joining us for a Q&A, so please get your questions ready for her. And I do have one question for you before we move on to our next presentation. What kind of priority is immigration and refugee resettlement for this incoming administration, do you think?
Well, I think immigration is a big priority. I mean, I think that this administration that is coming in recognizes the harm that has been put in place over the last 4 years by the current administration. I think there's also, even if you look at the couple of areas that are starting to come out from the transition team on their website, racial justice is one big area too. And I think that that is inclusive of the needs of immigrants, as well as many other communities of color in this country, and clearly a big attention and reform agenda needed in both those priority areas.